Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. It's Football at 4.
Josh Hennick filling for Mike Gill here in the 4 o'clock hour on 97.3 ESPN. Football at 4. Andrew DiCecco joins the show each Thursday. Catch all of his work covering the Eagles and the NFL draft over at InsideTheBirds.com. We'll ask him about the Eagles, the 53-man roster, and more. Plus, we'll get his thoughts on what DeAndre Hopkins said about Jalen Hurts, all here as we're counting down the hours to the start of Memorial Day weekend here in South Jersey on a Football at 4. Andrew, welcome back in. How you doing today?
Josh, I'm doing well, man. Good to be with you.
Good to be with you. So I want to start with, I know we talked about it with Moshe a little bit yesterday. I want to get your perspective as well. So for those who don't know all the details, DeAndre Hopkins was asked who are his quarterbacks he would love to throw him the ball. Well, he named 5 guys, and Jalen Hurts was among the 5. So how do you read into a guy like DeAndre Hopkins, who's never played with Jalen Hurts, saying, I want that guy throwing me the ball?
Well, I think he's seen firsthand the exponential growth of a quarterback in Jalen Hurts, who really has made such a monumental leap that you really don't see in the NFL from his second to third season starting. And I think the arrow is trending up with Jalen Hurts, and he sees that. And there's a plethora of talent surrounding him, and he's able to make best use of them. And like I said, the offense really just accentuates what he does well. And I think that a new offensive coordinator in Brian Johnson is going to further his development. So all those things combined, yeah, I think most receivers would want to play with somebody like Jalen Hurts, who's a top 3 quarterback in the NFL right now.
That's interesting. You said top 3 quarterback. The question we've been asking throughout the show is he a top 5? So why do you put Hurts in the top 3, whereas maybe somebody else would say the 3 is Mahomes, Allen, Burrow? What you're saying is I'm taking one of those 3 out of your list, it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, I have Mahomes, and then I have Joe Burrow, and then I have Jalen Hurts. I can't put Josh Allen in front of Jalen Hurts right now. Jalen Hurts has delivered in the postseason, and on the game's biggest stage, he answered the bell. And Josh Allen hasn't proven that he's able to elevate his team to that level. I've seen Jalen Hurts put a team on his back, literally in the Super Bowl, and will it to happen and make things happen. And I've seen some special things from him last season that it's kind of hard to put somebody who hasn't accomplished what he has in front of him. So he's number 3 for me right now.
When you talk about, these different players, right? These quarterbacks, how important is it to you, Andrew, that I said earlier, this is my perspective on Hurts. I think what differentiates him for me is he doesn't turn the ball over. He doesn't force his team into bad situations. And I think that is one of the most underrated parts of his game. So, yeah, he might not be throwing for 5,000 yards, but he's also not throwing you 15, 20 interceptions.
Yeah, exactly. And a side note for Josh Allen, for as electrifying of a player as he is, he's also much more careless with the football and his body, by the way. So there's all these different things that you can look at. And I just think that when his team needed him the most, he didn't necessarily come out on top, whereas Jalen Hurts moved the offense forward and propelled the Eagles to really they had the Chiefs on the brink there in the Super Bowl. So I think that Jalen Hurts has to be a top 3 quarterback in many people's minds.
What do you say to the people who say, hey, Jalen only did it for 1 year? How can I say a guy is top 5 after only 1 season? What do you say to those people?
Well, I mean, that's other quarterbacks that have been deemed top players at their positions after 1 season. But I think a lot of variables go into that, Josh, and you have to look at the progression. Some of the things that he was doing, he was making some very difficult throws. I mean, I can think of the 2 to Dallas Goedert that very few quarterbacks in the NFL can make. Those throws on a rope and in tight coverage, and just his ability to win and his the work ethic that he puts into his preparation. Like he's the quintessential ambassador for the Philadelphia Eagles. And I think a lot of teams would like to have a guy like Jalen Hurts who's going to do whatever it takes to maximize his potential and ensure that he puts the team in the best position to be successful. And I think when you look at all those different facets, I think that you're going to continue. They all tend to believe that you're going to see a quarterback that's going to continuously improve each season, as long as he can stay healthy.
You mentioned the stay healthy part. Somebody texted into the show earlier, and they said that they're a little concerned that Hurts might be a hit away from a serious injury. How do you rate the injury concern with Hurts? Because my thing is, I think Hurts has done a pretty good job at avoiding big hits, unlike a Josh Allen who's trying to run people over because he is 6'5", 240.
Well, every quarterback's a hit away from a serious injury, right? I mean, Nick Sirianni said it best. They didn't sign Jalen Hurts to that contract. They didn't pay him more for him to do less. And a lot of what makes him special is his elusiveness outside the pocket and his physicality in goal line situations and short yardage. And I think that they're going to continue to utilize that aspect of his game. And I really don't think that he is that careless with how he utilizes his body. I think that he gets out of bounds when needed. He fights for extra yards when it calls for it. And I think that overall he's been really smart in how he protects himself. So that's not really a big concern for me. Those big hits and things like that can happen to any quarterback. And I think the Chicago injury was just sort of a fluke. I mean, it was sort of how he landed and how he fell. But I mean, up to that point, Josh, he's eluded many serious hits. So I think that he's one of the smarter running quarterbacks in how he alleviates and how he's able to alleviate some of those bigger hits.
We're talking with Andrew DiCecco for today's Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. InsideTheBirds.com is where you find Andrew's latest article where he talks about 3 under-the-radar candidates for the Eagles' 53-man roster. And there's 2 I want to focus in on specifically with you, Andrew. I want to first start with Josh Jobe because Jobe is a guy, he's a holdover from last year, and he was a guy that people had hopes for. They weren't sure what he could do, but he played a lot of special teams last year. Is he a guy that in your mind is turning into that reliable special teams player on a team like the Eagles that, for lack of a better term, values special teams more than other teams?
Yeah, it's no secret that I'm a big Josh Jobe guy. I was throughout his career at Alabama. He had a down year coming out. Prior to that, I had him as a higher draft pick, and it just never happened. But I think the Eagles have good value there as a developmental prospect. He has very long arms. I think he could be a little bit more potentially than a special teamer at least for some teams that aren't as deep at the position as the Eagles are. But I think that he really acquitted himself well as a gunner opposite Zach McPherson. He played over 200 snaps on special teams, 76% for the season in those 11 games when he was healthy and active. But he's just a physical player. He plays with urgency. I think he offers positional versatility. And when you're looking at some of the players that he could be directly competing against in camp, namely Greedy Williams, you have to wonder, where does Greedy Williams, is he going to be able to contribute in the third phase? I don't know that he can in the way that Josh Jobe can. So to me, I think that's going to be an interesting battle to watch because many just want to pencil in Greedy Williams to make the roster. But when you're looking at the 5th and 6th spots potentially for at any position, you have to be able to contribute in the third phase, and Greedy Williams is going to have to prove that he can do that.
What do you think Sean Desai's role could potentially be in Josh Jobe's development? Because we know that Desai, I forgot his name for a moment, Desai, he has a long special teams and defensive backs coaching background. So how do you think that might influence things for Jobe this upcoming training camp?
Yeah, I think that sort of favors him going into camp, knowing that he's a younger player. He has a year. He's been in the league for a year. He's established himself on special teams. He was one of the very few bright spots on a beleaguered special teams unit last year. And I think that he also offers positional versatility, whether it be as a potential nickel, but I think even more so as a safety. So you add value there potentially. Obviously, if he makes the team as the 6, he wouldn't really be called upon to play defense unless there was a litany of injuries there. But I think that you have something worth developing there in Josh Jobe, and he could force the Eagles' hands to keep 6 players at the cornerback position, which is very heavy, but I think his special teams prowess may sort of dictate that.
You mentioned Greedy Williams. We can touch on him for a moment. I mean, this is a guy who was a college All-American. He led the SEC in interceptions, right? And his NFL career just hasn't really worked out due to injuries and other things. What is a realistic expectation for Eagle fans? Because, Andrew, Eagle fans, they see a name they recognize, they get excited, whether that guy can bring anything to the table or not, they get excited.
Exactly. And, you like the name. I like Greedy Williams coming out of LSU, but when you look at his sample size, I mean, he hasn't had the cleanest bill of health. And I mean, his play has been up and down largely during his time with the Browns. So you look at the guaranteed money, there's very little guaranteed money allocated to Greedy Williams, which would tend to indicate that the Eagles aren't overly confident that he could be, you don't want to etch him in stone as making the roster. He's going to have to prove himself. But you look at the limited special teams experience, you look at the modest guaranteed money, and I think that you see a player that, despite having a name and having some pedigree, he's going to have to fight for a spot on this roster. He's, buried in the pecking order here. And let's not even forget Zach McPherson, who's also going to be in that conversation as well. So Greedy Williams has a bit of an uphill battle, I would think, at least, to make the roster.
If you had to look at if Greedy Williams was making the roster, do you think his future long-term is as an outside corner or as something else? Because I always wondered, was Greedy Williams a guy who might eventually become that, jack of all trades DB kind of player?
No, I view him as an outside corner strictly. He doesn't have a ton of size that would indicate somebody that can hold up for a 17-game slate. So I think for me, you like his length, you like his fluidity and athleticism as an outside player. Mm-hmm. But again, when you're looking at it as a back end of the roster type of player, you want to have versatility, which, provides optionality to a defensive coordinator. And if you can't contribute on special teams, then where is your active, how can you justify keeping him active on game day? So it would kind of be, kind of pointless. He's on a 1-year deal as it is. So he's going to have to acquit himself on special teams, I would think, to make an impression and make the roster.
The other guy you wrote about I want to ask you about is Tyler Zentner. And I was talking with Mosher about this on yesterday's Football at 4. The Sipos situation is just so odd because Sipos is, for all intents and purposes, feels like he's like a pretty average punter in this league. And you thought when they brought in Brett Kern, he'd be better, and he wasn't as good as you hoped. And then Sipos played and did what he did in the biggest game of the year. And now you got Tyler Zentner, who is this, for lack of a better term, almost like a phenom coming out of college. And it almost feels like, well, if he can't beat Sipos, then there's no hope for the Eagles' punting situation.
Well, I think it's important to temper expectations. I can remember a number of years ago, a guy named Kerry Spear, who had the nickname Murder Leg, who I don't even know that he made it through the early stages of training camp, but there was a lot of, he had a highlight tape and he was known to have this big leg and things like that, and it just never materialized. So you don't want to put too much pressure on an undrafted player. But I think that in Zentner's case, there's going to be a legitimate opportunity for him to push Sipos off the roster. He also doubles as a kickoff specialist, in which he did for 3 years at Kansas State. I think he was perfect. He was perfect on his field goal opportunities. I think he had a long of 53. He landed 27 of his punts last year inside the 20. And, I mean, he has a lot of upside. And I don't think that he agreed to come to the Eagles just to be a camp body. I think that there was an understanding and a mutual agreement that he was going to have a legitimate opportunity to push for a spot here. And I think you're going to see it take shape in camp.
Oh, is there anything more oxymoron than a guy who goes to a school like Vanderbilt and his nickname is Murder Leg?
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
I'm
think
just
so.
saying.
And
it's like...
Also, Janarius Robinson's another player that I mentioned also as someone that, as a dark horse that could potentially push for a roster spot.
Absolutely, yeah. Folks can read more about Robinson over at InsideTheBirds.com. But with the punting situation, I'm trying to figure out what's going on here, Andrew, because, Matt Ariza, he gets cleared of all the charges. He's totally clear. The Jets bring him in for a workout. I'm just kind of sitting here like, well, the Eagles could have brought him in for a workout. Like, are they that committed to the Sipos Zentner competition? They wouldn't even bring in somebody else to even give him a look?
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. I mean, maybe there was it was a money thing. Like there's a team that's gonna, maybe he gets in, he likes the situation better at another team and the Eagles don't want to work him out, and he doesn't want to entertain a workout with the Eagles who already have two punters. He could be looking for a more favorable destination. I'm not quite sure, but I think the Eagles are comfortable, based on what we've seen, that they're comfortable in the head-to-head competition that's going to take shape this summer. And I really do think that Zentner is going to have a fair shake to push Sipos off the roster. And for the Eagles, I mean, you might be wondering, give Sipos a chance at redemption this summer. Was it a fluke? Is that a sign of things to come? Is this who he really is? So there's a lot of questions that need to be answered this summer. And I think that it's good not to just hand him the job because he's the veteran incumbent. I think bringing in somebody who was a pretty prestigious undrafted player, one of the cream of the crop as far as undrafted players go this year, I think bringing in somebody like that shows you that they're serious about giving him some run for his money.
Speaking of positions of battles coming up, the Eagles did work out somebody this week, DJ Fluker, the former first-round pick. He's played tackle and guard. We know a lot of Eagle fans. I was telling Mosher yesterday, Andrew, every time I run into Eagle fans, they ask me about right guard. I've not met a single Eagle fan that's not asked me about right guard in the last couple months. And Fluker is a guy with a lot of experience, but he hasn't played for a couple years. So what are your thoughts on Fluker coming in for a workout?
Yeah, I get asked about the right guard spot a lot too. That's interesting workout because he's played a lot of football. He's logged a ton of snaps. A lot of them have been at right tackle and guard. He's had about 300, I believe, at left tackle, if I'm correct on that. But a versatile player. Obviously, he hasn't played in 2 years, but the familiarity is there with Jeff Stoutland. And the Eagles really do need to add some veteran depth, I think, at least, on the offensive line. I think they lost a crucial piece there in Andre Dillard, which didn't look like much on the surface. But when you have somebody you can know that you can competently plug in at left tackle, should something happen, right tackle in a flux, that's not his strong suit. But just having somebody that you can rely on and put somebody there that's played games before at a relatively high level was sort of comforting if you're the Eagles. They don't have a ton right now. Jack Driscoll is in all likelihood going to be your swing tackle, and the only other pure guard, I believe, that is on the roster is Sua Opeta. Brett Toth is a player who can play guard, and he's a tackle as well. So I think adding a veteran there is really important, especially for a team that prioritizes the trenches like the Eagles do.
Do you think Fluker is a guy who makes sense then for what you're talking about? Because I know that one of the criticisms of him has been his technique in dipping the head a lot. You think that is something that can be, worked out with Stoutland, or do you think that, because he hasn't played in a couple of years, that maybe it's a little too much of an uphill battle?
Stoutland University, Josh. I would bring him in, and
you're a believer,
and have full confidence that they can rekindle that relationship that they had back at Alabama, and Jeff Stoutland's going to get the most out of him as he does any offensive lineman that's come through there. He maximizes their potential. There's countless success stories down the line. So I think the familiarity could help, and also he's a guy that's played a ton of snaps. So and he should be fresh after not playing for 2 years. So it certainly can't hurt to bring him in.
Andrew DiCecco, believer in Stoutland University here on Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Check out Andrew's latest Count Them In at InsideTheBirds.com. Get the full write-up on Ty Zentner, Josh Jobe, and Janarius Robinson. Andrew, great stuff today. Appreciate you jumping on. Have a safe weekend, my friend.
You bet, Josh. Talk soon.